doing an interview with Senator Richard Black for the LaRouche PAC video show. Senator Black is not only a state senator in the state of Virginia, but he's a retired colonel from the Army and served, and it'll be important for this interview, he served as the chief of the Criminal Law Division for the Army at the Pentagon, at the JAG office in the Pentagon, for several years in the 1990s. So he's quite familiar with the questions of law enforcement as well as military issues. He also served in Asia during the Vietnam War and spent time in the Philippines, where he made many friends and still maintains some of those friendships. What I want to discuss today is the war on drugs being launched by the newly elected President Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines. He pledged during his election campaign that he would crush this massive drug trade and the drug addiction of 3 to 4 million of his citizens within 6 months. He's not sure he can make that schedule. But he has in fact launched a full-scale war on drugs since his inauguration on June 30th, has already been very effective. But as you know, and as most Americans know, all you read about in the US press and you hear from President Obama is that he has carried out atrocious human rights violations, extrajudicial killings, that somewhere around 2,000 drug dealers have been killed by the Army and the police who have carried out this serious war on drugs. So I know you have strong views on this, and I'd like you to discuss what you think about what a war on drugs is and what's going on there in the Philippines.
Well, it's really a very fascinating situation. President Duterte was formerly the mayor of a once lawless city, Davao City, and he was absolutely ruthless with criminal actors there, and he brought law and order to the city. I happen to have a very dear friend from Davao City, and I asked him, I said, what's your thought of President Duterte? He said, I love him. He said, he's great. And this is a fellow who spent his career in the U.S. Army, but he's Filipino by birth. And so, you know, I think to some extent, I kind of understand people's concerns. Duterte said, look, we're going to kill the drug dealers. If you're dealing drugs, we're going to kill you. If you're taking drugs, you better turn yourself in. We're going to rehabilitate you, but you're not going to be out on the streets taking drugs. We're treating this like a war. Now, the United States had a war on drugs. We called it a war on drugs, but it was very quickly undermined by border state politicians who worked very hard to make sure that the Mexican border was open as a transit point for drugs, and now it's just wide open. I mean, we're bringing heroin and marijuana and cocaine, everything under the sun is coming across in massive loads. In the Philippines, President Duterte, he views it as a war, not as a police action. And I think that's the difference. Is we always viewed ours as a police action. It was like addressing any type of crime. But it was literally breaking down the culture and the society of the Philippines. And so the people of the Philippines elected President Duterte by a tremendous margin. And they wanted law and order, and he gave it to them. Now, they're 4 months into the war on drugs, and estimates are somewhere around 2,500 drug dealers have died in the process. But he announced just the other day, I think yesterday, that there are very few drugs on the street, and I take him at his word. I think he's right and honest about that. one thing that we need to understand, every country and every culture is different. The Philippines is, it's a nation of 7,000 islands. And it is difficult to govern those islands because you have these separations and consequently, to rule the Philippines, you have to rule with a very firm hand. And that is what the Philippine people have chosen, is to have a very strong ruler. And I think he is well along the way to winning the war on drugs. And I think that there will be a time when he sort of begins to treat it as a police matter rather than a military matter. But I think it is wise for Americans to recognize these differences in culture and to say, okay, Filipinos who elected this government have a better feel for their country than we do sipping our cocktail glasses back in the United States.
I took the time to look up how many overdose drug deaths there are now in the United States. And the figure is around 38,000 per year. 38,000 per year. That's more than 100 every day, people dying from drug overdoses in a country which, as you said, has basically opened its borders, a president who has adamantly refused, in fact ruled, that no banker caught laundering drug money shall go to jail, so that the biggest drug dealers, the bankers running the drug economy, are go scot-free. And of course a president who is legalizing drugs, who's pursuing the idea of legalizing drugs in the United States.
Well, he's refused to enforce the prohibition on marijuana, which, whatever you think of it, it is the law. And yet he has simply ignored it, and so all across the nation you have states that are enacting legalization laws without, I think, understanding the consequences. I don't think it's an accident that the federal government has projected this notion that we just really don't care about drugs anymore, and as a consequence, in Virginia, in states all around the country, we have this massive epidemic of heroin. I suspect that the vast bulk of those folks started with a marijuana cigarette and took some cocaine, and then the next thing they're on heroin. And
even the other side of that, which is people who start with opioids for painkillers and then find it's cheaper to get cheap heroin on the street these days. But we've recently learned through public exposés that the government has refused to prosecute the pharmaceutical companies who acknowledge that somewhere near half of their produced opioids are in fact not going into medical circles, but are somehow leaking out onto the street.
Yeah, and,
so,
they've created this myth that somehow the prisons are full of people who were caught with a marijuana cigarette. And I will tell you, you know, as a former chief of the Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, that users don't go to prison. They don't. What you have is major dealers who go to prison, and often the reason that a dealer is in prison is because he was investigated for having 2 pounds of marijuana and suspected strongly of having murdered somebody else, and they plea deal it, and so he's in there ostensibly for drugs, but in fact for things that are much more serious.
To go back to the Philippines for a moment, as you know, President Duterte has recently had a trip to China, a very successful trip to China, even though this brought great consternation in the White House and other places in the United States. And as a result of that, the Chinese, since there's clearly not going to be a conflict in the South China Sea with the Philippines, are doing in the Philippines what they've been offering to do and are doing in all other countries in Southeast Asia, and in fact all other countries in South America and Africa for that matter, which is that they're offering to carry out real development. They're going to be building railroads, water projects. They've already built a drug rehabilitation center, which is already beginning to service the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young users who are seeing the light and turning themselves in, not to be jailed, but to be rehabilitated in these centers. So this process of reestablishing the Philippines' role in China's New Silk Road development perspective for the world, the win-win approach to the world, is again treated as somehow a threat to the United States. But how do you see this new relationship?
Well, you know, I think the United States needed to handle the situation with President Duterte in a more sensitive fashion. We went at it with a bludgeon, and we began making accusations and things of this sort. And as a consequence, the Chinese went in. They offered assistance so that they could rehabilitate people and so forth. And the next thing, the Philippines, which has been a long-time ally of the United States, and frankly very popular with the Philippine people to this day. The president said, look, you know, I'm with the Chinese. The Chinese are offering me assistance, and all you offer me is condemnation. I think we could have handled it better. You know, I can understand where we might have criticized some of the methodology, but I don't think we needed to be on our bullhorn telling the Philippines how to conduct its affairs. Now, in addition, we've followed up, because we're always, you know, we always have to use the hammer on other countries, and we had planned on giving them 26,000 rifles, and we said, we're going to block that now. You've really offended us. And so Duterte has said, fine, I'll go to Russia. Russia's going to give them to me. I'm sure they will. And so the Philippines has been it's been an important ally of ours in the area, and they have the finest ports in the world. Of all nations, they have the finest ports, and so they have great strategic significance. And we have not approached that with sufficient consideration to the importance of it and the need to say, okay, this is somewhat vital to us, and we need to tone down our rhetoric. But I think we've made some significant mistakes, and we've got some real patching up to do if we want to maintain a relationship with the Philippines.
I think what many Filipinos are now coming to recognize is that when the Ferdinand Marcos government was overthrown, largely through direct U.S. intervention by George Shultz, Paul Wolfowitz, and others in 1986, declared to be a dictator and so forth, he, like Assad in Syria, that you've made the point over and over, it was tremendously popular in the country, but there was a group that was rallied against him, and they succeeded in removing him. But with removing him from office, all of what he had brought to the Philippines, a industrialization program, rice self-sufficiency, the building of the first nuclear power plant in Southeast Asia, health facilities, not only for the Philippines, but for all of Southeast Asia, all of that has been shut down. And the Philippines, that was once looked at as the most promising developing country in Southeast Asia, has now become the basket case with tremendous poverty, which Mr. Duterte, President Duterte, has always pointed to the fact that you have 30 to 40% poverty and even hunger across the Philippines. So in all this time of the U.S. development and U.S. friendship and U.S. aid, all we were willing to do was invest in mines to take out their raw materials, or to use their young people in call centers to serve Americans with their banking or computer problems, but no industry, no infrastructure. And now the Philippine people see an opening, an opportunity for that. And I think what President Duterte said to his business people should be listened to, as you're saying, by the United States, which was, well, why doesn't the United States make us the same offers that the Chinese are offering us? And then we'd be glad to take them. Don't you think?
Well, we have bonds with the Philippines that are not going to break easily. There are there are a tremendous number of Filipinos in this country, and they have relations. They tend to be very loyal, patriotic Americans. So I don't think that the flap with the Philippines is going to break our relationship, but we need to address it carefully to mend relations and not to be so quick to step on toes. Now, you mentioned Ferdinand Marcos. He was the great hero of the Philippines coming out of the Second World War. He was viewed as a hero and someone who had participated in the war. And then, for whatever reason, we decided we didn't want him anymore. And this is a story that repeats itself from the United States State Department time after time after time. And of course, the State Department and the CIA are integral parts of the same organization for all practical purposes. And for some reason, we feel this compulsion to impose our greater intellect, our superior intellect, on people in other cultures. And I will tell you that no one in New York understands the culture of Virginia, let alone understanding, the culture of the Philippines. I've spent time there, and I find it a fascinating place. I've actually been shot at very near to where President Duterte grew up by the Moro guerrillas. And, there's this tremendous complexity, 7,000 islands. We need a State Department that moves back from this idea of regime change. Every disaster to American foreign policy in the last 20 years has resulted from an American move towards regime change. And it would be a shame, I think, to lose our alliance with the Philippines. I don't think we need to make them the battering ram in some sort of conflict with China, but I think we need to maintain good relations with them. And I'm confident we can do it. And I think if we have a change of regime in the State Department, that's where we need a regime change. If we have that, I have every confidence that we could get someone who had a sensitivity to the feelings of the Philippine people and their culture, and we can bind these wounds, and I think we can have good relations in the future, and I think we should do that.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a message that will be received well in the Philippines, as well as hopefully in the United States. So thank you. I encourage you all to stay in touch with us. We can send out updates from the LaRouche PAC if you click on the message there on your screen, and keep watching. We'll thank you for Senator Black for a very interesting discussion, and we'll see you another time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.